The Shakespeare Code is the third season's opening trip into British nostalgia. A celebrity historical where the Doctor journeys back in time to meet a famous character and to deal with more alien menaces masquerading as something altogether more sinister. This time, the Doctor and new companion Martha travel back to meet William Shakespeare. It is a little on the nose, but perhaps that's not a bad thing. After all, teaming the Doctor up with Queen Victoria in Tooth and Claw did seem a little cynical when the show opened with a gag at the expense of Margaret Thatcher nonetheless. The rather safe and occasionally quite postcardy portrayal of British history aside here, the Shakespeare Code is more interesting as a rather novel form of arc building for the show, but is an episode that can certainly be described as rather filler in the grander scheme of things. Saxon was the arc word for the show's third season, but was restricted to those episodes set solely in the present. However, the Shakespeare Code winds up offering major thematic foreshadowing of the season ahead, and actually does some great work in establishing some of the key players, such as Martha, quite well. The Shakespeare Code does feel like a rather shallow portrayal of British history nonetheless. Sure, there's the occasional complication or shading added here or there. We're reminded of a couple of themes that the Black Death was in living memory. We discover how the mentally ill were treating in Bedlam. Shakespeare reflects on the death of his son, and the episode implies he abandoned his wife. These are just small touches though, and they serve to add a bit of historical accuracy, flavouring to what amounts to a nice runaround on some fancy sets with a British icon. Of course, so little is known about Shakespeare that it's quite hard to represent him in the Shakespeare Code, and it does present him as a fairly typical guest star of the week, really. After he makes a pass on the Doctor, our lead quips, "Oh, 57 academics just punched the air." Given that academics can't agree on a definitive list of plays written by Shakespeare, and the public fascination with conspiracy theories about whether or not the man actually existed, it would seem a bit much to expect anything but a standard runaround. And it is fun. There have been much stronger Doctor Who celebrity historicals with much more compelling guest characters, but this is okay. Unfortunately though, there have also been many more better explorations of Shakespeare in popular genre fiction. The Shakespeare Code doesn't seem like it measures up to the promise of putting the Doctor and Shakespeare together. Not that there's anything wrong with what we get. The Shakespeare Code is a solid 45 minutes of fun, which checks all the boxes, but it's missing a really meaty moment. There's nothing as touching here as the idea that Charles Dickens would shortly die after being reinvigorated by his encounter with a strange man in a leather coat, or an honest discussion about faith and hope in the face of a personal loss from Queen Victoria. Shakespeare doesn't really get any big moments like that here. There's a suggestion that his genius brings him close to madness. "I've been mad," he tells Martha. "I've lost my mind. Through this play set me right again," when talking about Bedlam. While you can make a case about the writer's interest in insanity might have served as an outlet for his own difficulties facing the loss of his son, it still feels like a rather simplistic and misguided genius equals insanity stereotype, which is hardly conducive to mental health awareness, especially at the time. It just all feels rather simplistic and quite shallow. There's nothing especially profound offered about Shakespeare or his world here. The trappings are nice though. David Tennant is, as ever, great fun. He relishes playing the tour guide to a historical version of Great Britain. "Oh yes, and entertainment," he boasts. "Popular entertainment for the masses, if I'm right. Just down the river by Southwark, right next to... oh yes, the Globe Theatre." There's an enthusiasm and energy, which carries a lot of the Shakespeare Code, even the overly used recurring gag about the Doctor providing Shakespeare with his good lines, which I kind of like. However, once you get past the fact that this episode's premise is fun and shallow, there is some interesting stuff going on beneath the surface. Doctor Who is entering its third season since the revival. It's just about a cultural phenomenon again. Billy Piper has moved on to greener pastures, and we've swapped out our first companion. What's remarkable about this episode is that it doesn't try to take the new viewers for granted. There's a conscious attempt to make this third season a solid jumping-on point yet again. Martha, the new companion, serves as an effective surrogate for new viewers. She articulates a lot of ground that the show covered in its first season about the mechanics of time travel. "The thing is though, am I missing something here?" she asks. "The world didn't end in 1599, it just didn't. Look at me, I'm living proof." It's pretty much the exact same question that Rose asks the Doctor at the climax of The Unquiet Dead, and which is necessary for the show and the audience to accept if they're going to invest in this show. That includes getting Martha acquainted with the various gimmicks and shortcuts the show has learned to use. Psychic paper, the Doctor explains at one point after reintroducing the paper. Shakespeare can see it's blank, but Martha reads what he wants it to read, so the audience can intuit its function. It's a nice way of introducing these concepts in case of any new viewers have tuned in to see what all the fuss is about. For returning viewers as well, it's used as a nice character beat to remind us how new Martha is. Long story, the Doctor clarifies, or doesn't. "Oh, I hate starting from scratch." It's quite clever writing, really, from Gareth Roberts. At the same time, the show also takes care to distinguish Martha from Rose. Despite her colloquial language, thing is, etc., it's quite clear that Martha is better educated than Rose ever was. Her questions about time travel tend to be more scientific and mechanical. But how do you travel in time? What makes it go? The Doctor replies by dismissing her query. Oh, let's take the fun and the mystery out of everything. She's actually quite aware of the concept of paradoxes and time manipulation. You step on a butterfly, you change the future of the human race, she speculates early on. What if, I don't know, what if I kill my grandfather? These are questions it probably never would have occurred to Rose to ask, but she didn't tend to think so rationally about things. That's not to suggest that Rose was any less intelligent. She never asked about the implications of changing history, but she was smart enough to manipulate the Doctor into letting her save her father's life, even if it wasn't planned in advance. Of course, this is also quite clever foreshadowing. The Shakespeare Code actually works much better at setting the tone and suggesting a theme for the season than it does about similar historical runaround. Martha's more mechanical questions about time travel hint at the idea that things might get a bit, to quote a later episode, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. Even the brief appearance of Queen Elizabeth I at the end of the episode, wanting to execute her sworn enemy for a crime he hasn't committed yet, into the shape of things to come. That's time travel for you, the Doctor remarks. All of this does a good job priming the audience for the temporal mechanics of the season, where the Doctor inadvertently releases a threat into the third to last episode, who travels back in time to Christmas and weaves his way throughout the season. To be fair, the parting of the ways in Series 1 also suggests that time travel could play havoc on cause and effect, but Mr. Saxon is something altogether more complex. While Davies wasn't always the strongest at structuring setup and payoff, he generally worked quite well in broad themes. Of course, Martha is the show's first non-white permanent companion. It's a title which attracts a fair amount of controversy, not least because it downplays the fact that Mickey had been a recurring guest star who travelled in the TARDIS during the show's second series, but the media consciously pushed Freema Agyeman forward as the first companion from a minority background, which is not a good track record for a show that has been over 40 years old at the time. Then again, some responses from fandom suggest that some of the show's fans weren't that much more progressive either. Even if you don't subscribe to the idea that Martha was the first minority companion, the fact that one can make a convincing argument that she was in 2007 raises all manner of unfortunate questions. Then again, travelling into British history with a young black woman raises all manner of potential problems. The show is challenged in how to deal with the fact that some parts of British history were rather unpleasant for people who weren't white, and this is actually explored much later in the series, in Thin Ice in Series 10. The Shakespeare Code is the first time that the show has to really deal with a potential issue, and to be fair, Davies does raise the point, am I alright? I'm not going to get carted off as a slave, am I? Martha asks. The Doctor responds, I'm not even human, just walk about like they own the place. Davies has portrayed history in the show as being somewhat more multicultural than it probably was. Crowd scenes in historical episodes like The Girl in the Fireplace last season frequently featured a racially diverse ensemble. It's a bit of a minefield for the show to try and navigate. Is it better to be true to history or to try to craft some sort of accessibility? I wish it were like this version of reality. After all, if Davies did restrict the portrayal of non-white characters in episodes set in the past, that would often mean either excluding them or entirely forcing them with the Doctor to deal with the fact that he's protecting a racist culture. Each and every time. I can see why this choice isn't ideal, and I can understand why the show didn't want to make Martha's race a big deal every time she ventured into the past, and I'm actually glad they didn't. That said, there's also a sense that we need to be honest about our history, particularly on a family show with a relatively young audience. It's grand to pretend these things weren't always tolerant and multicultural, but it also misrepresents the current reality. We don't live in a culture that has fully resolved all of the issues with minorities and diversities, so it's a bit strange to see Doctor Who suggest that not only does equality exist now, but it always did. The truth is, it's not a question with a perfect answer, and I'm sympathetic towards any writer trying to deal with race within the confines of a show like Doctor Who. I admire Davies for being willing to even address it. However, I think that Paul Cornell's Human Nature does a much greater job at being upfront and honest about what British society was like for people who weren't white at that time, even within the last century or so. It doesn't overwhelm the episode, but it's there and it's honest, and we'll get to that great episode in time. Still, it's far too easy to get fixated on Martha and where she falls with the discussion of Doctor Who and race. It's important, but it runs the risk of diminishing her as a character. Martha is much more than just the first black companion. She exists on her own terms, with her own characterization and her own personality. And I think that Martha got the short end of the stick with New Who companions, but it has nothing to do with her race. And it has nothing to do with her unfortunate position. She just has the misfortune of following Rose. I mean, I liked Rose, partly. It feels strange that I feel like the need to clarify this, but the first season character ranks as one of the best companions in the history of the show. However, Doctor Who went on to run the character into the ground, as I've said before. During the second season, her and the 10th Doctor became these incredibly arrogant and self-centered time meddlers, with Rose portrayed as something of a special companion. When she left, Davies made sure she got a kick-ass job and a new dad. He then brought her back and gave her a replacement doctor later on. It's nice that the show doesn't just pretend that Rose went off to live on a farm or something. It's nice that her departure has consequences. However, there's also the fact that there is no longer a regular on the show. There is a point where Doctor Who should stop being about the person who left almost a year ago. Here the Carrie Knights, the villains of the piece, tried to hurt the Doctor by misquoting her name, prompting the Doctor to declare, "Oh, big mistake, because that name keeps me fighting." One wonders what would have happened if they picked Mel from the classic series. To be fair, the show concedes that the Doctor's attitude towards Martha is actually quite unfair, treating her as a surrogate for Rose. "No, there's something I'm missing, Martha," he explains, as he lies in bed with her. King of the mixed signals. "Something really close, staring me right in the face, and I just can't see it." Rose would know. Friend of mine, Rose. Right now she'd say exactly the right thing. "Still, can't be helped, you're a novice." "Never mind, I'll take you back home tomorrow." The show seems to concede that the Doctor's blindness and rudeness towards Martha is unfair, which makes it more of a bearable thing than him being less friendly towards her. He hangs the threat of shipping her home over his head, constantly reminding her that she's there as his sufferance and that she won't get to stay for long. He promised you one trip and one trip only, he advised her at the start. The show would eventually allow Martha to call him out on this in the Lazarus experiment and give her the strength to walk away in the last of the Time Lords. But it doesn't make his behaviour any easier to like, and at least acknowledges that he can be fixated on Rose a little bit too much. I hope they can also be read as an apology for some of the excesses of the season, where it seemed like Rose had stuck around him for a third season. Even if Billie Piper could be convinced to sign on, it still felt like she was there. The Shakespeare Code isn't arguably one of the more important episodes of the third season, but from the perspective of the season's mythology arc, it actually kind of is. Obviously, with the whole Sackler thing existing in the present, his influence doesn't carry over, but the Shakespeare Code is the episode which does a lot of foreshadowing of the major twist to happen in the last episode, the last of the Time Lords. Of course, it doesn't do nearly enough to set up the glowing Tinkerbell Jesus Doctor. I might be expecting a bit too much, but we'll get to that in time. Instead, it meditates on the importance of words. This sounds like a basic thing for a piece of drama, but given how the Doctor defeats the Master in the end, it represents the most significant of foreshadowing for the season. It's probably one of my favourite aspects of the whole episode, in all honesty. Words and shapes following the same design the Doctor uses. Standing on the stage, say the right words at the right emphasis at the right time. Oh, you can make men weep or cry with joy. Change them. You can change people's minds just with words in that place. But if you exaggerate that, words can change the world. Words can shape it or mould it, bend it. This is even more literal in fiction. Oh, but there's a power in words, the Doctor remarks. It's a weapon. The right combination of words spoken at the right place, with the shape of the globe as an energy converter. Even the importance of the name is discussed here, as the name Doctor will become pivotally important at the climax of the season. Sure, there's a mumbo-jumbo technical explanation offered, but it's just sort of different science, the Doctor explains. You chose mathematics. Given the right string of numbers, the right equation, you can split the atom. Carrie Knights use words instead. However, it all boils down to the same thing. Words are powerful tools, especially when they run the risk of becoming something more. Dodgy special effects, concept, actions, even ideas. It's hardly the most novel concept, but Davies clearly structures the season so that this episode comes early on, setting out the idea of using words to change the world, long before the finale follows through on that setup. It's just as important as any reference to Mr. Saxon or the Archangel Network, even if it serves the same purpose. It's dropping in an idea early on to see if the audience is actually paying attention when it comes to the end of the series, so that when Davies uses it later on, it won't come completely out of left field. I actually do admire it, even if it doesn't work as well as it should. No matter how you set it up, everybody thinks Doctor and the world gets better. It's still going to seem like a cop-out ending, particularly when you use it to write your way out of a pretty brutal cliffhanger. Again, it's a nice touch that I respect, even if it doesn't quite work quite as well as it might. I can see that Davies is making a genuine effort, and I really do respect that. Overall, this episode certainly isn't the strongest of the season by far. However, it provides a nice little bit of foreshadowing and setup, and the characters are all great, hinting at things to come, and it does have some great moments here. I give the Shakespeare Code a 6.5 out of 10.